The autonomy of our consciousness is something we don't often question. But what if our grasp on who we are as individuals was not guaranteed? How would we view our own sense of self if we witnessed the people around us going to sleep as someone we knew and waking up as someone else? What if two people could inhabit one body within a lifetime? No, I'm not. No. Que si la reencarnación no fuera simplemente un fenómeno que ocurrió entre la muerte y el nacimiento, pero justamente en la mitad de tu vida, que conecta nuestra carne mortal con nuestra identidad. ¿Y qué pasa cuando los dos ya no están unidos? Soy Drey de los muertos y es hora de alimentar tu cabeza. Iris Farkzadi was a 16-year-old Hungarian girl described as brilliant, artistic, and somewhat of a melancholy teenager. And in August of 1933, she fell ill in her Budapest home. It's unknown as to whether she slipped into a coma or simply fell asleep, but one thing was clear. The person who awoke the next morning was no longer Iris. The next day, Iris's mother attempted to communicate with the girl before her, but she was clearly distraught. She sprang up from the bed and attempted to run out of the house, crying and screaming wildly. The family tried to calm her, but one glaring issue prevented them from doing so. See, the girl looked like Iris, and she sounded like Iris, but she could no longer understand German. In fact, she pled with the family in a language they didn't understand, constantly repeating the words Pedro and Madrid. Iris's mother brought a number of people to the house in an attempt to communicate with the girl, and was ecstatic when someone finally identified her language as Spanish, something Iris had never learned. In fact, no one in their family knew Spanish. In order to reach a line of communication, the family spent the next few weeks teaching German to the stranger in Iris's body. Once they could understand each other, the woman introduced herself as Lucia Altares de Salvio from Madrid. And it only got weirder from there. See, Lucia claimed that she had died of tuberculosis 3 months before waking in the Farkzadi home. She was, or had been, a 41-year-old woman, mother to 14 children, and wife to a man named Pedro. She didn't recognize any of Iris's friends or family, and her personality was strikingly different from the girl who had originally inhabited her body. Iris had been a thoughtful introvert, while Lucia was a vibrant extrovert who loved singing Spanish songs and dancing traditional Hidalgo dances. She also identified as a communist who hated the upper class, much to the dismay of Iris's upper middle class family. It wasn't long before word spread of this miraculous tale. 2 years later, researcher Cornelius Tabori visited the Farkzadi home to interview Lucia firsthand. There, he uncovered some surprising information that the family had not been so forthcoming about. Information on what led up to this mysterious case of midlife reincarnation. Iris had been born the second of 4 children in 1918. Her mother came from wealth and was educated at a high-class school in Paris, while her father Gero was a chemical engineer and director of a large factory. Gero's foster mother was a spiritualist with a large collection of spirit drawings that Iris may or may not have witnessed as a young child. Gero eventually left the family for a younger woman, though the timeline of his departure is unknown. Iris was a brilliant student, but by the age of 15, her attendance had become somewhat erratic. This was due to the family's frequent spiritualist circles. It'd been predicted a year prior that Iris would undergo a great psychic miracle. Subsequently, her mother encouraged her to attend these unusual gatherings on a regular basis. Details of these events were gathered from a longtime friend of the family by researcher Carl Rothy. The friend, Mrs. Sipkai, said that during these sessions, Iris would often fall into a trance-like state in which a vast number of communicators, or spirits, would speak through the girl. Iris seemed to have a specialty for channeling foreigners who would speak through her in a number of different languages. Sometimes they even claimed to be from other planets. Alongside these communications, Iris created hundreds of spirit drawings. Most remained a mystery, but some, allegedly drawn by extraterrestrial communicators, contained maps to their home planets and writings in their languages. Perhaps more concerning was that the communicators often stayed with Iris after the sessions were over, sometimes for hours and sometimes for days. A few were even hostile. Mrs. Sipkai recalled times in which an inhabitant would bite and beat Iris's mother, and once when she herself was grabbed by the throat. During these times, Iris would be kept home as she would not be able to recognize her teachers or other students. Iris's absence was simply chalked up to illness. But then came the night where Iris actually was ill. Her mother sat at her bed just before she fell asleep and reported a moment in which the girl seemed to stop breathing and then suddenly started again. This was to be one of the last moments that she'd have with Iris in this form. Mr. Farksadi was not even informed of this illness until months later. The next morning, when the girl woke up as Lucia, Iris's mother assumed that this was simply another one of her episodes and expected Iris to eventually return. It became clear to Tabori why Mrs. Farksadi had not been so open with reporters, or even Iris's father, about her active role in her daughter's transition. When Iris's mother realized that her daughter was not returning, she called upon spiritualist Guido Casal to hypnotize Lucia and try to retrieve Iris. According to Guido, Iris returned and spoke harshly of Lucia, claiming she wanted her body back. After some discussion, her mood shifted to melancholy. She reflected that geniuses die young and that no one had ever understood her. This was the last anyone ever saw of Iris. As Hungarian seemed a more difficult language to learn, Iris's siblings taught German to Lucia. She had also been taught middle-class manners, though any remnants of Iris's passion for mathematics and art had vanished completely. Iris's mother had since come to the realization that her daughter was gone and accepted Lucia in as a member of the family. She even reached out to the Spanish embassy to ask if they required Lucia to register as a Spanish national and get a residence permit. Iris's sister admitted that Lucia made early attempts to escape back to Madrid to be with her children, but eventually accepted her place in the Farksadi family. Iris's father was not informed of her transition until some time later. He told Tabori that he missed his daughter, but that Lucia was a little less moody and a much better cook, so he didn't mind staying for dinner some nights. As much as she had become a part of the family, Lucia still maintained her communist beliefs. She didn't have much to say about being a child of the Farksadi family and instead thought of Iris's siblings as her own children. She spoke freely about her years in Madrid, noting that her Hidalgo dancing had been greatly admired and that she was taught ballet growing up. As a late teen, she performed on stage and at a well-known nightclub called Arizona. When asked how she felt about displacing Iris, she started to cry. "I never asked to be reborn," she said. "One moment I was simply floating happily in space, in a state of contentment, and then suddenly I was inhabiting the body of a young girl, a virgin again, after having 14 children." She was pleased with her new body, but felt that ousting Iris from it was not her fault. At Iris's age of 21, Lucia married a German-Hungarian officer and former priest, though how much he knew of her past is unknown. Together they had 2 boys and 1 girl. Unfortunately, once grown, their relationship with Lucia remained cold and distant. Her son's wife even considered Lucia a witch and kept their daughter away from her. Over the years, a series of interviews were initiated with Lucia, and her validity was tested time and time again. During one interview, journalist Laszlo Rotoni wanted to test the claim that Lucia had no recollection of the Hungarian language. He conspired with his crew to have a conversation around her using some very obscene Hungarian words. This, they thought, would embarrass the sheltered schoolgirl into blushing or laughing, but Lucia paid no mind to their conversation. In other interviews with professors who specialized in Spanish culture, it was found that Lucia was not aware of many well-known sites in Madrid. But she could accurately describe in great detail her hometown church. Statues, altars, the embroidery on altar cloths, all of which professors confirmed were correct. Though her knowledge of Madrid did not impress the Hungarian ambassador of Spain, she was able to correctly identify appliances commonly used by impoverished Spaniards. In one case, interviewers purposely mishandled a common Spanish item used for drinking. Lucia grabbed it, identified it, and showed them the proper way to use it. In 2005, attempts were made by psychical researcher Mary Rose Barrington to locate Lucia's family in Madrid, or any trace of her children, but she was ultimately unsuccessful. Of course, 70 years had passed by then, making the search nearly impossible. But along the way, her identity was both scrutinized and validated by the many Spanish expatriates she came across, though she was always delighted to converse with them and did so with ease. At 80 years old, she seemed tired of attempting to prove who she was and had all but forgotten the names of her Spanish children. Over the years, the curious case of Iris and Lucia has been attributed to everything from reincarnation to multiple personality disorder, or what is now known as dissociative identity disorder, and even possession. But to this day, the definitive answer remains inconclusive. Though Lucia's case is unique, scientists and medical professionals have studied a number of similar cases throughout the last century. Cases of people becoming musical prodigies or speaking a foreign language they never learned after a head injury. As well, the Society for Psychical Research has studied multiple convincing claims of reincarnation. For the most part, these instances have no explanation. It seems there's still so much we don't know about life, death, and what happens beyond the veil. If you enjoyed this strange but true tale, be sure to subscribe and check out previous episodes. We put out new videos every other Friday. If you enjoy blooper reels, Q&As, and behind-the-scenes footage, I implore you to become a patron. These are just some of the patrons who make these videos possible. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be well and stay strange.